So to this point, I've pretty much done my musical influences series about country musicians and some folk musicians who have influenced my current style that I usually work in. But I want to switch it up a little bit and go much farther back into my earlier musical influences and talk about the artist on the first tape that I ever owned as a kid of my own selection. And that is the rock pop star Alanis Morissette. And she grew up in Ottawa, Ontario, in a devout Catholic family. And she always was really into performing and singing and would make a lot of home videos with her siblings. And by the time she was a teenager, like 15, 16 years old, she already was signed by a record label to make a 2-album deal with MCA Records Canada. There's a lot of destruction going on over there, so there'll be weird machine sounds. So MCA Records Canada had her record these 2 very mainstream poppy early 90s records, and at the end of that deal they had been pretty successful in Canada but not extended very much beyond that, and so she needed to find a new record deal to make her next album. And she had moved to Toronto by her late teens to further her career, and she started working with another musician named Glenn Ballard, and her manager decided that she should move to Los Angeles in another country to go continue her career and look for a new label. And most labels rejected her work and didn't want to take her on, but one called Maverick Records took her on. And with Glenn Ballard, she wrote and released her album Jagged Little Pill. And boy, was Maverick Records happy that they signed her on, because that 1995 release went on to become the second biggest selling album of a female artist of all time so far. And no one quite expected that amount of success, but there was something that was new and special about what she was doing, because even as late as 1995, it was still not something you would hear in mainstream pop radio, to hear a woman swearing and screaming about her sex life and expressing such raw anger and emotion. It was still a new thing, and it got people's attention. And it got my attention, even though when I was hearing it on the radio, I didn't know she was swearing necessarily, because they bleeped that out, but I probably understood. And the reason I really got into her was my best friend's mom at the time was like a cool hip mom, and her whole family was really into Alanis Morissette, and they had the albums, and we would just dance around to them with her family and listen to them on trips and everything. And so it got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna buy this for myself. And I really, really enjoyed that album, and she came out with another very successful album a few years later called Supposed Former Infatuation Junkie. And I feel like I related to that album a lot more. One of its biggest criticisms when it came out was that her wordy personal lyrics alienated her audience, as opposed to her more poppy Jagged Little Pill. But that was what I really liked about it, and I think probably a lot of people she was talking about a lot of deep stuff for a pop album. She was talking about family issues and therapy and suicide and mental health and all these things that weren't that common in pop music. And I loved the way she would take long words and just not care that they weren't fitting rhythmically into a song. Like, she'd take the word unapologetically and just go, unapologetically alive. She's just like, I'm going to say this whole word and it's going to take as long as it takes. And I really liked that about her music. She just took as much time musically to do whatever. Her songs are very crooked and crazy. And she came out with a number of albums in the following years, not quite as huge as those, but they still did well because she was a success. And she had done some acting when she was a child in Canada, and still did some in the years after releasing those albums, some TV shows and some movies, including Kevin Smith's movie Dogma and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where in both those movies she played God, which I thought made a lot of sense to me, and is another thing that's kind of amazing considering her devout Catholic upbringing. And she had kids. She has 3 kids, and I don't know if it was after all of them or one of them, but she went through a very, very intense period of postpartum depression, and now talks on talk shows and stuff about it to kind of raise awareness and healing around postpartum depression, and also about having really constructive relationships, which is interesting. She has all these wild relationship songs. And so I'm gonna do a song. Well, she was another thing I want to say is she had a song. She had a new album coming out, which is in 2 days on May 1st, 2020. I'm recording this on April 28th, 2020. So it's in 3 days. But we're in the COVID times right now, and so the release of that album is postponed. But I'm gonna do her song that really, really first got the attention of the mainstream world, at least in America, that I still don't totally relate to in my songwriting, but probably paved the way even for me in terms of what you're allowed to say and do in music, especially as a woman, and definitely paved the way for a lot of people who came right after her, like Avril Lavigne and Pink and all the other like really strong, emotional women singers. So I'm gonna do her song, You Oughta Know, and it's rumored that this song was written about the actor who played Uncle Joey on Full House, because they dated when she was in her late teens. But it's about anyone we want it to be about, isn't it? I want you to know that I'm happy for you. I wish nothing but the best for you both. Another version of me, is she perverted like me? Would she go down on you in a theater? Would she speak eloquently? When would she have your baby? I'm sure she'd make a really excellent mother. 'Cause the love that you gave her, we made, wasn't able to make it enough for you to be open wide. No! And every time you speak her name, does she know how you hold me until you die, till you die, but you're still alive. I'm here to remind you of the mess you left when you went away. It's not fair to deny me of the cross I bear that you gave to me. You ought to know. You seem very well. Things look peaceful. I'm not quite as well. I thought you should know. Did you forget